From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. With just one day to go before general elections in Brazil, on Saturday, the two main presidential candidates continued their activities. Far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro and Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad held caravans with their supporters after the closing of their campaigns. According to polls, they remain in first and second place, respectively. Meanwhile, center-left candidate Ciro Gomes and Social Democrat candidate Geraldo Alckmin remain in third and fourth place. And jailed former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has sent a message to the people just hours ahead of the elections.
Queridas companheiras e queridos companheiros.
Dear comrades, it is important that you go to vote due to several reasons. I am not going to mention the hunt against myself because I am used to it since I started the labor movement. I want to talk with you, with your heart and your soul. I think we have to defend the legacy of the Workers' Party, which has done more than anyone for social policies in the country. This country needs you like never before. And now people have to rise. There might be people similar to us in this country, but nobody is better than us.
The Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad has been visiting the city of Bahia as the last stop of his campaign. Haddad is said to march through the Feira de Santana. He's there to show that he's fully committed to the people, despite the fact that his counterpart, Jair Bolsonaro, leads the polls in the region. Meanwhile, a convoy in support of Bolsonaro has made its way through the streets of Brasilia. Cars were decorated with Brazilian flags and pro-Bolsonaro emblems. The caravan started in front of Congress and has been moving around the city. But in the city of Sao Paulo, hundreds have gathered to protest against the far-right candidate. Protesters have used the slogans "Ele now," meaning not him, to drum up support against the former army captain. To talk more about the presidential race in Brazil, we're now joined by Dr. Mauricio Santoro, a political scientist and international relations professor at Rio de Janeiro State University. Hello, Mauricio, thank you for joining us. With just a few hours before the elections, can you tell us what do the polls really mean? Can we trust them?
Well, I think we can, but there is a lot of uncertainty about this election. The polarization is very high, and it became a very difficult moment for us in Brazil. Many people feel that democracy itself is at stake because there is this growing fear about the rise of the far right and what's going to happen with the minorities in this country if they win the presidency of the republic.
There has been talks in Brazil about Bolsonaro representing the race of fascism. What do you think about that?
I think that he's a far-right candidate. It's not a normal candidate. He has been talking about minorities, about homosexuals, about women in a very harsh way, inciting violence. And this is the first time in the history of Brazil when we have a politician speaking like that in a presidential campaign. And we don't have strong institutions, we don't have good democratic checks and balances, so it's really worrying what is going on in this country. Lots of bad things can happen. People usually compare Bolsonaro with Donald Trump, but it would be even worse than Trump. And we can see in the United States what is already happening. I mean, we saw today the nomination to the Supreme Court, and of course that many people in Brazil fear that it's going to be more difficult here.
And one more question. How far do you think Haddad is taking over the place of former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva?
Well, Lula is still the most popular politician in Brazil, despite being in jail, despite his conviction of corruption. But there is a limit about how many votes he can transfer to Haddad. And he transferred something about 60% of his popularity to Haddad. That's a big number. Probably it's going to be enough to put Haddad on the second round. But after that, it's more complicated because there is also a huge feeling against the Workers' Party, against the left. And Haddad is going to face that in the second round. So his best option would be to look for alliances with liberals, with centrist voters, even conservative who are moderated. And that's going to be a political challenge. It's not easy to put them all together against the far right.
Well, thank you so much, Mauricio, for sharing your information with us today. Now let's take a look at the Social Liberal Party candidate, Jair Bolsonaro. He has been in first place in all polls since former President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva was prevented from running.
He is a 62-year-old former captain in the army who defends the military dictatorship and considers torture legitimate. He has become notorious for his sexist and homophobic remarks, and he has presented himself as a messiah to save the Brazilian people. Bolsonaro has served 7 terms as a member of the lower house of the Brazilian Congress. His political platform includes a strong security agenda. It includes lowering the age of criminal responsibility to 16 and spending more on the police and intelligence services. He's also in favor of privatizing public companies.
Let's take a look at the Workers' Party candidate, Fernando Haddad.
The Workers' Party candidate entered the race late after the Supreme Court barred Lula from running. But he has already consolidated his position in second place in the polls. Fernando Haddad is an academic, a former mayor of Sao Paulo, and a former minister of education. He helped to found 18 universities, 173 school campuses, and 360 federal institutes. The Workers' Party also established an education policy to give more opportunities for black and indigenous people. Among his proposals are the abolition of the labor reform, a reform on social investment, and privatization policies imposed by President Temer. Also a reform of the state system to establish a truth commission to investigate crimes of the dictatorship and the development of a basic food income.
The Workers' Party has recently criticized the spread of fake news that may try to sway election results. Our correspondent in Rio de Janeiro, Andrés Vieira, has more.
The Workers' Party has criticized the spread of fake news on social media, especially for demonizing presidential candidate Fernando Haddad. During a political rally in the city of Bahia, Haddad made a call to the people to vote based on facts and awareness, and not to be influenced by fake news. Tomorrow, the voting stations will open at 8 a.m. and they will close at 5 p.m. The latest poll suggests that there will be a second round between far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro and Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. A day ahead of general elections in Brazil, polling stations have been set up for the millions of voters expected to take part in them. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemus, brings us more.
Here in the Regional Electoral Court of Sao Paulo, over 147 million people will vote tomorrow. Ballot boxes have already been moved to polling places. There's a 3% increase on the number of voters compared to the 2014 general elections. This will also be the first presidential election after the impeachment of former President Dilma Rousseff. 50% of voters will use an electronic voting system. The voting machine uses fingerprint recognition before allowing the ballot to be cast. Here, voters will pick the names of the presidential, local government, and parliamentary candidates. There are high expectations ahead of tomorrow's elections, as there will be a key point for the Workers' Party after the judiciary coup against Dilma Rousseff and the imprisonment of Lula da Silva.
Many citizens agree that reforms made by former Education Minister Fernando Haddad have greatly impacted the sector.
Education was one of the priority areas of both the Lula and Dilma Rousseff administrations. This approach saw smaller states also benefiting from higher learning opportunities. The Federal University of the Valley of the São Francisco was one of the 18 tertiary-level institutions and 173 campuses created by Lula and Dilma. Haddad, who worked as education minister under both governments, is credited with the creation of this institution.
We are talking about a big population, and in short time, this university started to work. For example, we have esteemed doctors and other medical professionals who came from and studied here.
Everton Fagundes was one of millions of new students who benefited from Haddad's education policies. The son of teachers, he was able to study at the University Medical School because of a special fee system catering to poor students. His parents also benefited from a base salary policy.
I admire Haddad a lot when he was a minister. It was because of him my parents got base salaries, because they are teachers. So imagine my mom, a school teacher that earned $250 because of a regional policy. The base salary helped us a lot.
The education policies implemented by Haddad virtually changed the face of the graduate school. Before, it was a privilege exclusively reserved for the rich.
I had the opportunity to do this course at the university despite the fact that I lived 300 kilometers away. I had a grad diploma, but I had the opportunity to pursue my master's. Before that, this would neither be possible for me, nor countless others.
In the next elections, not only will the president be voted in, but also the school system in this country. The university is located in the border of São Francisco, northeast of Brazil, between the cities of Petrolina in Pernambuco and Juazeiro in Bahia. Among these areas forgotten by the right wing is the strength of the Workers' Party and of Fernando Haddad, a force summarized in a man, Lula da Silva.
If I see Lula, I would tell him to please come back to help us, help our schools, because only he improved the states of Ceará and Pernambucano.
The sun goes down on the São Francisco River, a town waiting for better days. They are hoping for a government with a new vision for Brazil.
In Rio de Janeiro, Sunday's election will take place under the shadow of the ongoing military intervention that has gripped the city for months now.
Since February of this year, Rio de Janeiro has been under a military intervention for public safety. This radical measure was approved in Congress with the support of representatives like Jair Bolsonaro. On the streets of Rio, citizens are highly critical of the far-right presidential candidate.
I believe Mr. Bolsonaro is a fascist. I do not want him to represent me in anything, not for me, nor for the Brazilian people.
He's a very bad person, a homophobe. I have no nice things to say about him.
Despite presenting himself as a candidate for a new political era, Bolsonaro has been a politician for over 30 years. Out of 170 proposed bills, he's only successfully managed to pass 2. His candidacy is highly divisive for Rio voters.
While nobody is perfect, I disagree with many of his ideologies. I think his ideas are not the best. He has terrible ideas. If he wins, many innocent people will die. Very bad things will happen.
While Bolsonaro has been avoiding debates over a controversial medical recommendation, experts feel that his government will be extremely conservative on social issues and neoliberal in economic matters.
His would be an authoritarian government with economic liberalism. This is the exact scheme Pinochet used in Chile during the 70s. The man in charge of Bolsonaro's economic policies is Paulo Guedes, who went to graduate school in Chicago. His policies would include privatizing Brazil's central bank, the Federal Reserve, Petrobras, and any other public institution.
Staying away from debating his opponents, Bolsonaro continues to lead in the polls. It's likely he will face off against Fernando Haddad, the candidate for the Workers' Party, during a runoff election.
Moving on, a group of 90 Venezuelan migrants left the Dominican Republic on Saturday under the Venezuelan government's Return to the Homeland plan. This is the first flight under the program to leave the Dominican Republic. Venezuelan Ambassador Ali de Jesus Uzcategui says another group will leave the country in the next few days. He says there are about 30,000 Venezuelans in the country, and many are facing difficulties.
I want to give Venezuelans a message. Don't live up to false dreams. We are going to die in our land. I am a Venezuelan as you all. We left our country to work, to meet our needs. They treat us really bad. I'm coming back because they treat us bad. Wherever we go, we can't get a job. They want to use women and enslave us men. We need to fight for our country.
Our correspondent in Santo Domingo has more.
19 Venezuelan migrants returned to their country on Saturday in the first flight from Dominican Republic under the Return to Homeland Plan. The plan was created by Nicolás Maduro's government to allow Venezuelans who have suffered from racism to return home. They left their country in the search for a better life due to the economic crisis largely caused by the sanctions from the US and European Union. Ali de Jesus Uzcategui Duque, the Venezuelan ambassador, said there is another group of Venezuelans set to hit home in the next few days. In the Dominican Republic, there are approximately 30,000 Venezuelans. Dominican authorities are assisting those who wish to return home.
And on Friday, 96 Venezuelan migrants living in Ecuador returned home thanks to the Return to the Homeland program. This is the 5th flight chartered by the Bolivarian government from Ecuador. Migrants say they have suffered from xenophobia and poor working conditions. They're excited to start over back at home.
They arrived little by little to the Venezuelan embassy in Quito. This new group of migrants were ready to return home, bringing the number of those who have decided to leave Ecuador to nearly 400.
I had a job for a little while. They paid me very little. I was being exploited, working long hours for little pay, so I quit, but they never paid me full my severance. I was having trouble paying the rent, so I decided it would be better to return home.
The situation for us here is very rough. They don't hire us, and when they do, they pay us less than they should. We are exploited.
Before heading back home, the group of migrants, along with the staff from the embassy, paid tribute to Mariscal Antonio José de Sucre at his mausoleum. On the way to the airport, many of them expressed their surprise at the initiative by the Venezuelan government to help migrants to go home.
I thought it was a lie at first. I saw many messages on social media that said this was dangerous, that they destroyed your passport, that you would be abused, so I had many doubts. But still, I went to the embassy. They helped me a lot. They were very nice to me. I'm not being paid to say this. This comes from the heart. I am very grateful.
Once they got to the airport, ready to board their flight, they said goodbye to Ecuador and sent a message of support to their compatriots.
We must continue to build a better future, a better Venezuela. Our country needs us. Venezuela cannot be rebuilt from outside. We must return and lend a helping hand.
This is the 5th flight that has left Ecuador, and authorities have not ruled out the possibility of more flights.
On Friday, Costa Rica's Legislative Assembly approved the economic reform plan proposed by the government of President Carlos Alvarado. The bill was passed with 35 votes in favor. Meanwhile, demonstrators gathered outside the assembly to reject the bill.
Despite bad weather alerts, which usually prevent people from going out, this time protesters are determined to gather outside the Legislative Assembly no matter what.
The people are completely against this reform, so we stand here, firm in our belief that peaceful protests are their answer. We are a people who believe in democracy, that is facing a stubborn president that insists on damaging our country.
Inside the Assembly, the proposed economic reform is moving forward. Representatives were given 10 minutes to vote as the reform is being rushed through by those who wrote it.
We have come to an agreement with our members that this national strike will remain in force. We will bend the arm of the government, no matter how stubborn they act. They cannot only work for big transnational industries or answer only to the IMF or the World Bank.
Protesters will continue pressuring the government. They recall a similar strike nearly 20 years ago that defeated the privatization of the energy sector.
In the year 2000, we defeated them once, and today we will defeat them again. What's in play here are neoliberal policies that will take us down a path similar to Argentina.
This strike is in its 26th day. Protesters demand a new economic reform that benefits everyone.
They need to listen to alternative viewpoints. Any reform must be just sympathetic, must treat everyone equally and benefit all of us.
Despite numerous complaints about the reform, the government rushed the bill through the Legislative Assembly. Few representatives spoke out against this process.
This economic reform will only be used to benefit companies in debt to public institutions. This has nothing to do with the economic deficit the country is going through.
On Friday, the economic reform was approved. Complaints are being filed in the Constitutional Court, which will take 30 days to provide a ruling. In the meantime, the general strike will continue.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. The United States Senate has confirmed Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. This despite mass protests against him due to his alleged sexual misconduct. Vice President Mike Pence announced Kavanaugh won by 50 votes against 48. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford accused Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her when they were in high school together. An FBI investigation followed but did not lead to any charges against Kavanaugh. President Trump continued to support his nominee.
And the votes are very exciting. This is a very exciting time. Any time you have a chance to put a Supreme Court justice in position, and in this case, I think he's going to be a great, great Supreme Court justice for many years. It's a very exciting time.
Now it's time to bring you some other news from around the world.
A land swap deal with Chechnya in southern Russia has sparked mass protests now in their third day. Citizens believe that a border deal reached by the regional parliament in Ingushetia is unfair. Thousands of people have rallied against the proposal, watched over by riot police. The land swap deal is meant to diffuse tensions over territorial disputes that emerged after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Romanians are voting in a referendum to determine whether marriage should be defined as between a man and a woman. The Prime Minister, Vorica Dancila, said while casting her vote that the referendum is an expression of democracy. The Constitution currently defines marriage as between spouses. The LGBTI community has criticized the vote, saying it will rule out the possibility of legalizing same-sex marriage.
I don't know if this was really justified because we as a society are well balanced. There isn't a problem. It's probably in the context of the current trend. A swift and correct opinion of the Romanian society will be crystallized at the end of this referendum.
Dozens of Syrian civilians have been killed and wounded by a rebel armed group in Kafr Halab, according to activists. Witnesses say fighters raided the town of people to demonstrate against the attack. The armed group then opened fire on them.
We come to the end of this news brief. For everything on Brazil's election, you can check out our special website at telesurtv.net/English. Then go into depth and click on the option Brazil Elections, everything you need to know. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.